doesn't need really much of an introduction. If you're a Democrat here in Maryland, you pretty much know who she is. But for those who may not know, her name is Kathleen Matthews, and she is chair of the Maryland Democratic Party. But before she became chair of the Democratic Party, she had a long career. Oh, I shouldn't say long like that, but she had a beautiful career. First, here with our local NBC affiliate, ABC affiliate. So you might have saw her on the news a couple of times. She's also married to the wonderful Chris Matthews, and then she was an executive with the Marriott Corporation thereafter. And if you lived in Montgomery County, you might have saw her flyers and signs floating around when she ran for Congress a couple of years ago. And Kathleen has just been a huge supporter of the Democratic Party even before she became chair. Really also very supportive of women who are running elective office. We serve on the board together of Emerge Maryland. And it's just been really a stalwart here in the state of Maryland, really just supporting the party and supporting really great candidates who are running for public office. And her current role as the chair, she's going to talk a little bit about kind of what happened on Tuesday here in Maryland and just other parts of the country as well. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. So you are the true blue Democrats because you're here on a Friday night and it's raining and it's after the election, right? So thank you, and it's really fun for me to be here, not only because I love being Nicole's partner on so many great projects, including trying to recruit and train and elect more women to office here in Maryland, but also because behind the camera there is my good friend Andy, who worked with me for years at Channel 7. It was kind of, you know, my partner on television when we would go out and cover stories. So, hi Andy, great to see you. The funny thing is, there's a whole generation of us that kind of grew up together at Channel 7 who have retired in the last couple years, and they're all involved in Democratic politics. So I said to Andy, okay, so are you really doing Democratic politics? And he nodded. The couple that I started my TV career with, Paul and Holly Fine, retired to the Eastern Shore, and they hosted a big political event, a crab feast we did over there for Jesse Colvin, who was running for Congress in the 1st District. Paul Berry, my former co-anchor, came to that event. And so we're all out of the closet now as Democrats in our retirement. And I don't want you to spread that too far because people always talk about the liberal political media.
Yeah, that's true.
But in fact, we all were very straight shooters as in our TV career, just trying to tell the truth, trying to collect stories, and really covering the community. And that really was the foundation for me of really wanting to be in politics, was being somebody who did cover the community as a television news reporter, who was there representing the community in many ways, but also saw some of the issues and the problems that this community faces. And so it was a really natural transition for me to decide, sort of as my 3rd career, after journalism, then business, to be in politics. First running for office, and now really serving behind the scenes in many ways. So let me start off with some really good news about this election. I know a lot of people were very disappointed that we were not successful in electing a Democratic governor to replace Larry Hogan. Ben Jealous ran a fantastic campaign, I believe. He worked so hard, as did his entire team and Susie Turnbull. But it's really tough to run against an incumbent, particularly somebody who was as well funded as Larry Hogan. Hogan had 4 years to raise his campaign war chest. He had huge support from the National Republican Governors Association, the RGA, which wanted to make sure they kept that Republican seat. And so, you know, Ben had to fight not only Larry Hogan, but also the RGA and their campaign to try to define him over the summer. But Ben went to every part of the state again and again, and it actually made my heart fill up to see some Ben Jealous bumper stickers in the parking lot as I came in here tonight. Ben's idea of winning this campaign was to try to return Democratic voter participation up to the levels that we saw in 2010 and even 2006, when way over 50% of Democrats went to the polls and voted. And we agreed that was the right strategy, and we partnered with him on that strategy. Our goal was always more than 1 million Democrats. And we just got the numbers today, and we got out more than 1.2 million Democrats to the polls. The entire electorate was 2.2 million, so 1.2 million of that was Democrats. The other million was split between Republicans and independents. And while that 1.2 didn't elect Ben, it elected more Democratic legislators, so we cemented and actually improved upon our supermajority in the state legislature. And it also elected new county executives, so that now Democrats run 6 out of 8 of the counties in the state. And we flipped some of those seats red to blue. So in Prince George's County, we elected Angela Alsobrook, who is the first African-American woman to lead this county. Next door in Montgomery County, we elected Mark Elrich, even against a very robust and well-funded independent candidacy by Nancy Florine, elected him overwhelmingly. So those 2 counties remain Democratic. A bigger challenge was in Baltimore County, which is not as deep blue as Montgomery and Prince George's. And we elected Johnny Olszewski as that county executive to succeed essentially Kevin Kamenetz and the interim chair or interim county executive that replaced him. And then we reelected Jan Gardner in Frederick County, and we flipped Howard County and Anne Arundel County from red to blue. And those victories were especially sweet because not only do we have an African-American county executive in Calvin Ball in Howard County, but we have also Stuart Pittman in Anne Arundel County, and both of those counties had Republican county executives who were seen as the heir apparent to Larry Hogan. So we knocked out their bench. Much tougher for those people to run 4 years from now after a loss like that. And across the whole state, when you look at Johnny O or Angela or Calvin Ball or Stuart Pittman, this is a younger candidate, sort of a kind of a new bench of leadership for the party. And being county executive is great experience. Not that you have to do that to be governor, but it's a great place to be, getting your experience to be able to run for statewide office. So we're really excited about those. We also elected more women in the House of Delegates and the State Senate, so that those numbers are really getting closer to equal 50-50 representation. We actually picked up a lot of seats on county councils and county commissions in the red rural parts of the state. So in places like Wacomico County and Worcester County and Talbot County on the Eastern Shore, we picked up seats. And so we're really proud of those because our strategy was to be an all-Maryland strategy, 24 jurisdictions, and to campaign in every part of the state, as opposed to just looking at that deep blue I-95 corridor, which had become the strategy in the past. And we realized that we had orphaned Southern Maryland and Eastern Shore and Western Maryland. And in fact, Larry Hogan won huge margins in those parts of the state in 2014. So we knew we needed to rebuild our party infrastructure and find new candidates and new people to run in those parts of the state, and we did. So all in all, a disappointment in losing the governorship, but actually I think that the party's in a good place. Now we have to keep on building on that, and that's really, you know, the day after the election, you say, okay, what is next? We've got to make sure that we continue to keep our grassroots organizations busy. That means clubs like this, working in conjunction with our central committees and progressive groups that are out there, finding sort of the new things to work on, because after 2016, it was pretty easy to recruit people to go out on canvases or phone banks because people were so motivated after that Trump election. We got to keep that motivation up, and we got to keep that moving into 2020 as we prepare for the presidential election in the state. But that also will prepare us better for 2022, when we'll take back the governorship. So, you know, I think it's an exciting time. I think that Democrats have to continue to talk about the issues that are important to us. I think we have to look at, right now, the opportunity we have, because Larry Hogan has said he will be a bipartisan governor who will reach across the aisle. In fact, he has no choice other than being a bipartisan governor to reach across the aisle, because he's dealing with this Democratic General Assembly and now all these county executives. And they all agree on those core Democratic values of, number one, investing in our public schools. We also passed that referendum to make sure that the funding and the revenues from gambling will go into public schools. And I know there will be fights and conversations about how that money is spent and how you prioritize the funding, but the bottom line is that's going to make our public schools stronger. And there is agreement from the legislature to all of those county executives that we've elected on that issue. We also are looking at affordable health care, and how do we continue to do that. I think one of the things we've heard, but I'm not sure we believe them yet, is that this Republican Congress, the Republican Senate, is not going to try to repeal the Affordable Care Act anymore. Again, it's easy for them to say because now they have a Democratic House of Representatives. So again, you've got that check that we didn't have before Tuesday. And then, you know, issues like the opioid crisis and how we make sure that Larry Hogan, who promised to solve this, actually is forced to solve it, because it's really a problem in so many parts of the state. Free community college. You know, that was something that Larry Hogan took credit for in his campaign, but in fact, Ben Gillis was talking about that almost 2 years ago, and the General Assembly passed free community colleges, and ultimately Larry Hogan had to accept that. So one of many examples where he took credit for Democratic initiatives in his campaign. So I think those are the real issues, continuing to look at the environment, but really essentially affordable health care and what that looks like going forward. Number two, making sure that our public schools are strong. Number three, a $15 minimum wage. And we already heard House Speaker Mike Bush say he thinks that that is something that they will be looking at right away, as well as legalization of marijuana, which is something that I think people now see as an opportunity to fund public schools or fund pre-K. Again, those were ideas that came out of the Gillis campaign. So Ben Gillis's legacy is going to live on, I think. You know, he and his campaign team worked so hard. They're taking a couple days off, but I think you're going to see Ben Gillis really engaged in Maryland going forward, as well as not only the candidates who won, but candidates who lost in some really hard-fought races. So we feel good about things. We feel like the All-Maryland strategy worked. We wanted to get 1 million Democrats to the polls, and that was our shared goal with the Maryland Democratic Party's coordinated field campaign on behalf of Ben Gillis and all the other candidates. We blew through that goal and got 1.2 million plus to the polls, and now it's about keeping our democratic infrastructure and everybody engaged and figuring out the right thing to do there. So I'd be happy to take your questions tonight, and do you want me to just hand the mic to people?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Fine.
Well, when I was an election judge during the midterms, I noticed these pre-filled-in ballots. These ones every 4 or 5 people will carry these. You know what I'm talking about?
Sample ballots.
Sample ballots.
But these weren't sample ballots. These were introduced by candidates.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I just very livid that that's a sneaky way to do it. Can Maryland ban that?
So we saw what they call these official Democratic ballots in the primary, and we saw them again in the general election. The concern about them in the primary came up because, you know, everybody was a Democrat running, and so suddenly you were either on the ballot or not on the ballot. You were in the club or not on the club, right? And a lot of candidates who competed to be on those ballots but didn't get chosen were really upset about that. So after the primary, I promised that the Maryland Democratic Party would do a working group to look into that issue and whether we as a state party felt there should be recommendations on that, because it is misleading. I think some people do think it is the official ballot. Now, we saw it again in the general election. In the general election, they tended to be more inclusive, more candidates, but we saw ones that Republicans were putting out in Democratic areas, calling them the official Democratic ballot, with Larry Hogan on the top of it, and then Peter Francho as a Democrat, and then the member of Congress who really didn't have any significant opposition and was a Democrat, but then Republicans for the delegate races. So that was really confusing. So in many ways, these Democratic ballots put out by Democratic candidates have been enabled the Republicans to kind of mislead in their own way. So that working group that I created is going to start looking at that and other reforms that came out of the Democratic National Committee's Unity Commission. Things that will make our process more transparent, more inclusive, less misleading, and we'll make recommendations on that. I know the Prince George's County Democratic Central Committee also has a working group on the Democratic sample ballots, or those Democratic official ballots. In their case, they knew that there was a lot of hurt and anger around those in the primary, so much so that they decided not to do a sample ballot in the general election because they thought that could potentially lead to problems. We want to get to a place where people are informed, that they get the information, but they're not misled. So, good point. Great.
I don't know if you addressed this. Do you know what percentage of voters voted this year in terms of that? You know what I'm asking? Yeah. What was the increase in percentage-wise?
So my trusted pal Fabian, where's Fabian? Oh, in the back, okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm doing this from memory and I don't want to pull up my iPhone on it, but we know that voter participation of Democrats in 2014 had gotten as low as 45.7%, is that right?
I think it's like 47%, I believe is what it is.
47%? It was at 47%. So that had dropped below the 50% threshold, which is where we were in 2010. So we wanted to get above 50%. In fact, Democrats came out at 55.6%, I think it was. Fabian will correct me if I'm wrong. So we got up to 55% of all Democrats. Now, you can, be upset with that because you think, really, that's all? Yeah, really. But presidential elections rarely get above 65%. They're between like 60 and 65%. And midterms are much lower. So I think what we did is we targeted low turnout Democrats. We contacted multiple times people who had voted in 2016, but not 14, maybe in 10. So we went and we looked for people that had a spotty history of voting, more in presidential years than in off years, and we just went back to them on 2 and 3 passes to urge them to vote. We sent out mailers to them. We sent out mailers to everybody who was a new Democrat saying, thank you for registering since 2016. Make sure you vote. Here's the address on the on the internet to find your polling locations. And we also sent mail to people that had an uneven voting pattern. So I think we just need to build on that, and that's why I think there's really a role for these off-year canvasses, because you got to get people thinking about politics on a regular basis and how important voting is on a regular basis. And there are going to be groups that are going to be, Michelle Obama has targeted this as a campaign she wants to lead, and we're going to have other allies, I think, to help us do that. But Fabian, 55.8?
It was closer to 56.5.
56.5%. That's a big jump from where we were when we were down at 47% 4 years ago. Almost like a 10-point jump. So we feel good about that.
What's the population of Maryland?
There were 2.2 million people who voted It's about,
About 4 million people.
yeah, about 4 more.
She said population.
Yeah, yeah,
About
yeah, 4 million people in the state. How are you?
Madam Chair, how are you?
Good to see you.
Gosh, you know, Hogan appears to have benefited both from Trumpism and from his impression that he gave people that he was not a supporter.
Yeah.
And we seem to have allowed him to do that. So he, in the outer part, Somerset, Allegheny, and all of that, he racks up huge numbers.
Yeah.
Which means that, and I looked at the polls, which said that those people who radically opposed Trump, overwhelmingly, 95% supported Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
But then those people who moderately opposed Trump, he got 32 or so % of those people to vote for him. What I want to find out is whether or not we did an effective job of defining Hogan. And my own view is that we did not do that. And when I say we, I mean all of us. That he was able to claim that he was a moderate Democrat when he is supported by the Republican National Governors Association, the Koch brothers, all of these radical people who supported him. And so, you know, at what point do we discuss how did we let that go wrong? I mean, why didn't the Democratic Party nationally come in to support Ben Johnson? Why didn't, I think, the state leadership, because I saw many state leaders of the Democratic Party sending out Hogan material. I have that on my phone right now. With the Democratic leaders, I have the picture sending out, we work across the aisles together.
Sir.
And you know who I'm talking about.
Sir, you get the
Yeah.
mic close.
So,
Yeah.
you see where I'm trying to get us to talk about.
Right, right. So I hope you all heard that essentially concern that Hogan was able to define the terms of the election in many ways. And that is generally what incumbents are able to do because they command the media. A lot easier for an incumbent to get his story or her story told than the challenger. I would have to say that we worked for more than a year on a regular basis, and this is what Fabian, you know, who grew up in Fort Washington and is a Marylander, worked on every day as the communications director for the party. We tried to show that Larry Hogan did not stand up to Trump at every opportunity he had. He did not stand up early to Trump when Trump was trying to pull affordable health care away from hundreds of thousands of Marylanders. He did not stand up when the tax bill went through, which would have taken away essentially tax relief for middle-class Marylanders in their ability to write off their state income taxes, and was really a sham, a tax bill that was really for the big corporations. He didn't oppose that until the very end. He kind of always had it both ways. He'd be sort of quiet, he wouldn't stand up the way the Democrats would on day one, and then at the very end, he basically would disagree with Trump quietly when it was essentially too late. Similarly, he took credit for Democratic initiatives, things that he actually opposed initially and that were passed with a veto override in many cases because he would show up to sign bills. Now, we tried very hard to get that message out. Every Democratic candidate for governor through the primary tried to get that message out in their campaigns, and Ben Jealous consistently talked about those things in his campaign. We did it not only trying to get reporters to write about it, but we also did it in social media and other places. I think it just underscores the challenge when you don't have the bully pulpit, you know, which the governor has or the president has. I think, you know, with some Democrats showing they worked across the aisle, I think they do that because they are in conservative districts where to win they have to get Republican votes and certainly have to get independent votes. So while they may vote Democratic and be Democrats and fight for Democratic things, they want to project that they are able to work across the aisle so that they can get votes from the other party. And I think that's what you saw in some of that literature. Do I wish the story had been better told publicly? Do I wish we had more money for that, to be able to buy the TV ads where you can control the message? Yes. And I think what was challenging this year was there were so many great Democratic candidates running across the country that they were all competing for the same resources from the Democratic Governors Association, the DNC. The DNC put money into our race, but they put it largely into the field campaign, supporting our efforts in the field campaign, where I think we did a much better job in the people-to-people field campaign than Hogan did. But Hogan was able to control the airwaves because he had the $10 million in his own campaign war chest, and he also had the Republican governors to be able to do that. But I think you raised some interesting points. I think it was frustrating that we couldn't get more money because of the general competition for funds, and also the fact that, you know, when you have a primary with 8 people, as we did, you spend all your money in that primary. So the winner comes out of that primary, and Ben Gillis won 22 out of 24 jurisdictions. He won by 10 points, but unfortunately, he was broke. The campaign was broke at that point, so he had to start from scratch, whereas Larry Hogan actually started running TV ads even before the primary because he had no opposition. So he could start running the general election right away. Right here, and I'll work my way back.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My biggest concern right now as a Democrat here in the state of Maryland is redistricting. That is probably the one thing that Larry Hogan being reelected is crucial. The Supreme Court has just told the state of Maryland that they need to redistrict ASAP. Unlike what we were hoping for, and that's deferred 3, possibly 4 years. What that means is, obviously, we're looking at the congressional districts, and I don't know if Senator Van Hollen's running 2 years from now, or
And 4.
4. Okay, so he's a
Yeah.
What that means to the state of Maryland is basically, like Ms. Matthews said, even though there's a lot of Democratic senators and representatives in the House, they are very, very conservative, and they have to go the way of their constituency in order not to lose. The way that it goes down, there's a possibility that the 6th congressional district, which is David Trump, is going to be withdrawn, and that really has, I think, the major impact for the party. My question is, are we as Democratic Party starting to look at that right now, formulating strategies in order that we don't double and triple Republican presence in Congress?
Yeah.
Because let's face it, they lost this time. They're going to try to regain it.
Right, so by March of 2019, a court has said that the lines of the 6th congressional district, which they ruled were created in a partisan, pro-democratic fashion, have to be redrawn. That'll probably have a domino effect on the other districts. Already, Brian Frosch, our Attorney General, is looking at that directive from the courts to decide, can you appeal it? Do you appeal it? What do you do with it? So there may be some legal activity that I don't know about yet as they're reviewing all this. But I think ultimately we will see some redistricting at the federal level, and I think people are already starting to think about that. The western part of the state is more conservative, the eastern shore is more conservative, southern Maryland's more conservative. I think that, and you see in first John Delaney and now David Trone in the 6th district, and in Steny Hoyer in southern Maryland, more moderate Democrats representing those districts. So they represent their districts. Jamie Raskin represents his district in a different way. So I think you're gonna, you know, the Democratic Party is a big tent party. So, you know, we see Democrats that vary in their points of view, and I think you will see that in the kind of people that are elected in those districts. So The federal districts there'll be some lines redrawn. I think that as Democrats, we want to make sure is that we don't put down our arms on redistricting when other Republican legislatures don't put down their arms. Now, I know I talked to Mike Miller the other day, and I think they're already looking at some redistricting at the legislative level, and that is done by the state legislature. So it's a separate process, but they're looking at that as well. But I also think the first congressional district, where they put all the Republicans, that district probably should be reviewed as well, right? Because it's an Andy Harris that can win that district now because of the way they drew it so conservatively, as opposed to maybe a moderate Democrat or a moderate Republican. So I think you're going to see a lot of activity, and there's a lot of focus on it. It is real important now.
Thank you.
Right back here.
So I know you talked some about the role in getting out the word about Hogan's policies and him being conservative. And I wanted to ask about what you saw as the legislature's role in opposing Hogan and getting that word out, because a lot of what Hogan was able to accomplish was taking credit for the legislature. So have you looked at, passing popular bills knowing that Hogan will veto them to get that on the record? Because I don't think we saw that much in the past 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, $15 minimum wage, I think that's going to probably come up in this next legislative session. I think legalization of marijuana, to be able to fund the Kirwan Commission, which is the Education Commission, which is asking for universal pre-kindergarten in our public schools. I think that'll probably come up. I think those will probably be bills that Larry Hogan vetoes, and the legislature has to get the votes to be able to override those vetoes. They did that in the last session. I mean, they had community college, and Larry Hogan was not in favor of that, and they passed it through. There were other things like putting the constitutional amendment on the ballot that would actually have same-day voter registration. Hogan was not a fan of that. Republicans are not a fan of that. So we got some things. He was not a fan of the lockbox. He had another solution, and then ultimately he started doing TV commercials talking about the Hogan lockbox. So, I mean, that's the frustrating thing. But I think you're right. I think that, Jocelyn Pena-Melnick, is this her district? No.
Number 22.
Yeah, she's just phenomenal in, articulating the difference between Democrats and how Larry Hogan has shortchanged Maryland. We have some legislators that are fantastic, and many of those have been appointed to leadership positions. So you're going to see some of those folks in leadership positions in the legislature, which I think is really exciting.
There's one leadership position that concerns me the most, but I would preface what I'm about to say by suggesting to us all we should ask ourselves harder questions as to why Ben Jealous was not elected. I don't know the answer, but I think one part of the answer is that there were so many prominent, currently elected Democratic leaders in the state of Maryland who either were half-hearted in their support for Ben Jealous or didn't support him at all. But the legislative leader that I'm most interested in talking about is Mike Miller. His support for Jealous came late and was lackadaisical after that. And my question to you, and you're not going to be able to resolve this question for me, and nor can all of us in this room together resolve the question, but why should Mike Miller be reanointed as president of the Maryland State Senate when his support was so lackadaisical for the gubernatorial nominee of his party, which, as you say, carried most of the jurisdictions by a healthy percentage? Why should Mike Miller be reanointed as president of the Senate?
So that's really the decision of the legislature, and not our decision. The legislature picks their leader, and that'll be happening pretty soon. I have to say that within a week of the primary, and Mike Miller and other Democrats in elective office had supported Rushern Baker as their nominee. But within a week in Prince George's County, at the Prince George's County Education Association, we had a unity rally, and Mike Miller was there. Mike was there with Rushern Baker endorsing Ben Jealous. So I think some of the timing, the campaign decides when they want to time those things. I mean, I think, okay, You're disagreeing with me.
Well, I'll just say, I don't know how much support Miller evidence. I know this. I have friends who live in South County, and when they saw Mike Miller re-elect Mike Miller signs, they saw re-elect Mike Miller signs and his delegation. They did not see anywhere approximate to re-elect Mike Miller signs, elect Vangelis signs.
Point made.
I totally agree with this gentleman here, because you have to correct me. I thought the person who won the primary is the one that you support. Okay? Right away, Baker, Leggett, they set back. A lot of the problem Democrats set back, and they did not support this man. The Post said picky things about picky things that he did that Jealous did not do. Okay? And if the man came out of the private industry and he didn't have these political points, where were the Democrats to say, hey, you know, we're going to kind of help you out? Okay? My second thing is that when Pelosi gave her Post speech, it was excellent. Why couldn't she, as a Democrat, because health care is prominent, why couldn't that have been beforehand? It would have done a lot much better.
So, a lot of good points there. I'm seeing my friend over here who came to a fundraiser that I co-hosted for Ben Jealous with a good friend of mine who I introduced to Ben Jealous in DC. I was very proud to be part of 2 fundraisers personally, bringing all my friends and folks I know from politics together for Ben Jealous. So I just want you all to know that the Maryland Democratic Party was all in from Ben Jealous from day one. And we secured from all of the candidates in the primary a commitment to support the winner, and they did. Now, some were more engaged, you know, in the campaigning after the primary than others, but they all endorsed Jealous. And the party was in there 150,000%, whatever, because we, you know, hired 70 young people to run that field campaign. They organized 10,000 volunteers across the state, and those canvases all were with Ben Jealous at the top of the ticket and driven by electing Ben Jealous.
Is he going to stay in Maryland, or what is Mr. Jealous's future?
You know, I'm sure he is. His kids are in school in Silver Spring, and they were with him election night, and you know, it's tough to lose an election, but Ben, I think, has a great future in Maryland.
Good.
How are you? Good to see you again.
Well, I'm really bad because he lost. I mean, I think it's a real tragedy he lost, because I thought, is this on?
Just hold it close to your mouth.
I think it's a real tragedy that Ben Jealous lost, because he was not just another Democrat. He would have transformed the state, and so I'm real happy. I would like to second, I guess, one of the previous 2 speakers, also Alvin. Over there is Alvin Thornton, who used to be the chairman of the school board. Oh, excuse me, doctor. And I am concerned that 4 years ago, the Democratic Party in Maryland provided Anthony Brown with like 3 times as much money as they provided Ben Jealous this year. And I'm concerned that the National Democratic Governors Association provided a lot of money to the 2 good black Democratic candidates in Georgia and Florida, you know, comparable to what the Republicans governors provided their opponents. But my impression is that did not happen in Maryland, that the Republican governors association gave plenty to Hogan, and Democrats, one did not to Ben Jealous. But what I would like to bring up is, I've been walking around like this for 2 months, and I've been spending time on the campus of the University of Maryland, because I used to teach there. And I walk around, thank you, and I say to people, what do you know about Ben Jealous?
They know nothing.
And as she says, many of them know nothing. Now, the campaign did sign up at least 700 students to campaign to Ben Jealous. And what I heard was that they mainly used them to phone bank around the state. They did not use them to go around the campus and tell people on campus why they should vote for Ben Jealous. And so it helps to explain why, yes, we got out 1,200,000 Democrats, but at least 200,000 of them voted the wrong way.
Yeah, so, you know, I feel the disappointment. I share the disappointment. It was really hard to be there election night in the back room with the Jealous campaign. I have to say how proud I was when Ben Jealous in the back room and then again on stage gave a shout out to the Maryland Democratic Party for how hard we worked to try to get out the vote. And I think that it was a tough year because you mentioned Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum. There was so much competition across the country in big races. And places like Florida that are much more expensive to run campaigns. And we tried very hard to get the Democratic Governors Association to do more in Maryland. I think they may have been discouraged by the fact that there were polls that showed that Larry Hogan had 60% plus popularity, whereas those other races were open races where you were not fighting an incumbent. And they've got to make a calculation too on how they spend their resources. So Ben Jealous did a phenomenal job with the resources he had. I believe the Democratic Party ran a really robust people-to-people campaign. And I think the thing you should focus on is Ben Jealous started talking about free community college 2 years ago, and we're going to have free community college in Maryland. Ben Jealous talked about legalizing marijuana and using that and the taxation on marijuana to fund pre-kindergarten. I think you're going to see that happening in Maryland. Not without a fight, but I think you're going to see it happening in Maryland. He talked about fair wages and a $15 minimum wage, and now the Democratic Party establishment in the legislature is talking about doing that, whereas that had been resisted in the past. So his legacy will live on, I think, in the next 2 years. And I think he knows that, and I think that is comfort to him right now after running such a hard campaign. And we all just need to encourage him to do it again. You know, to encourage all of our candidates to stay in there and keep fighting. I unfortunately have to get going, and I know you have another part of the meeting as well, but I want to say thank you for being here, for being sort of really the stalwart soldiers in the army of our Democratic Party, for being as engaged as you are, and please stay with us. How many here get my newsletter on Fridays? Okay, we got to sign you up. Go to mddems.org, marylanddems.org. Every Friday we put out a newsletter. We have that newsletter every Friday was lashing out at Larry Hogan for the past year and a half with all the data and how Larry Hogan, who said he would change Maryland, has been shortchanging Maryland. So please sign up for my newsletter because that's the way to stay connected. And I really want to thank you for all you did. And thank you for voting and being part of our democracy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. See you.